And that was enthralling. It was amazing. Beyond the satisfaction of getting to see Machu Picchu, what really was so amazing was the fact that here, this group of people, 8 or 10 of us or so, really from a broad variety of backgrounds and lives, we were able to stay united as a team and eventually, reach our goal of reaching going to Machu Picchu. And almost all of that has to do with Wilda, our tour guide, who really held us together. And probably unbeknownst to her, she manifested a lot of the traits that leadership requires to keep teams together. And that's what we'll end up talking a lot about today. Before we go into the specifics, though, I want to tell you a little bit about how human psychology works. And we'll put you all to the test a little bit on this. In 1945, a gentleman by the name of Carl Duncker crafted something called the candle problem. And the candle problem goes like this. If you're given a candle with some tacks and a match, a book of matches, can you affix the candle to the wall in such a way that, the wax doesn't drip down onto the table below it? And so if you're like most people, you'll think, well, okay, maybe what I can do is use the match and heat it up a little bit and stick it to the wall. And eventually it falls off, and so that doesn't work. Some of you may think that you can kind of form something out of the tacks and affix it to the wall in that way. And great suggestions or solutions, but that's not the right answer. Eventually the candle will fall off and the wax will melt. But if you're like most people, after about 3.5 minutes, what you'll find is that the solution is that you've got to actually empty the box that the tacks were in and use the box as a base, and then you can attach that to the wall. The problem with this candle problem is that because I wasn't explicit in telling you that you could use the box as a tool, there's something that's called functional fixedness that sets in our brains. Because I didn't give you creative license to think outside of the box, and Carl Duncker found this as well, people don't naturally then think outside of the box because they weren't told to do so. And as a result, it takes them a little bit longer to solve the problem. This has a lot to do with human motivation because 20 years later, Sam Glugsberg, who used to be the department head for the Yale School of Psychology, knew about the candle problem, and what he wanted to figure out was how incentives, how motivation, external incentives. Got their microphone on there, I think. There we go. All right, so Sam Glugsberg, he knew about the candle problem, and he tried to figure out how incentives could help motivate people. And so what he did was he took the same candle problem, but in this particular case, what he did is he divided the groups, or the people, or participants, into 2 groups. Group A was tested for norms and averages. He just told them that they were going to be measured to see how fast it was that they could solve this candle problem. And Group B was incentivized. They were told that they would make money. And back in 1962, the top 25% of people were told that they would make $5, and the fastest performer would make $25, which is about the equivalent of $150 today. So there was a big incentive for people to try to solve this problem. And we'll see if this works, because I'd love this to be participatory. How many people here think that it was the group that was tested for norms and averages that did the best? That's Group A. How many people think it was the incentivized group, or Group B, that did better? I'd love to see either your responses in the chat, or if you quickly turn on your microphones to tell me what you think that answer is. Which group did better? Group A, the average, or Group B, the incentivized group? Not seeing any responses here, I don't think yet. No? Maybe I'm not seeing how to do this correctly. Are people doing this?
Click on everyone so you're able to see our answers in the chat.
Oh, I'm not being able to see it, but well, I'll keep talking to the ether here. For those of you that picked group B, the incentivized group, the group that was given an external motivator, it actually turns out that group B did much more poorly than the non-incentivized group. The incentivized group, on average, solved the problem about 90 seconds faster than the incentivized group. And the reason why that is again, this functional fixedness piece. When people had an incentive that they were working towards, they actually focused so intensely on that incentive that they actually didn't use their creative functions to solve the problem. And this was proven another way when he actually then dismantled the problem and showed.
I'll tell you about it later. I got some stuff I want to talk to you
There's terrible feedback here. Someone's got the record on. Are other people hearing this? There we go. All right. We'll keep going here. See how we're still on track.
Sorry, excuse me. This is Jennifer. Hi, Casey. Sorry, I have to jump in a little bit. I feel like it's going to be a lot of interruption if people have an option with the microphone. I think it would work best if right now we just put everybody on mute so that you won't get interrupted. If you want to see people reaction to the questions, could you please, you see there's a yellow thing on very bottom. It say everyone, and then it say Donna Brandon. Just click on everyone, and then you will be able to see everyone chat respond to your question. That way it would be no interruption in terms of the sound. So as for now, I'm just gonna put myself on mute again, and then it would be very kind of all of you to put your microphone, make sure it's all on mute, so that way it won't get interrupted. Thank you so much.
Okay, now I'm seeing down here everyone chat perfect. All right. So here's the problem, and we've known this for 40 or 50 years. Really loud. There we go. Okay, so here's the general challenge when it comes to motivation, and we've known this for some 50 or 60 years in the behavioral science, is that when it comes to motivating, external motivators, like oftentimes in the workplace, things like bonuses or extra time off or a title or something like that, those external motivators don't work for jobs that require creative input. They certainly work for jobs that are repetitive and don't require a lot of cognitive. There's some real loud noise. Someone's crumpling a paper or something next to the microphone. Okay, let's try this again. I apologize that the flow is not going all that well, but let me restate what I just stated. What we learned from those two experiments and what social science has learned from those two experiments, which are now pretty famous in psychology, is that external. Does someone have their mic on? Because there's a pumping paper. Okay. I'll repeat one last time here then to summarize if we didn't hear it. External motivators aren't the thing that get people engaged with their work when it comes to jobs that require cognitive input. Back in the turn of the century, in the 1900s and to 1901, that kind of thing, with the Industrial Revolution, external motivators really worked because most people's jobs didn't require a lot of cognitive input. They were factory line workers by and large. And if you wanted your factory line worker to work harder, you could give them an extra $1 for them to produce another widget. The problem is that most of our jobs nowadays are not repetitive. They require cognitive input. They require us to solve creative problems. And the behavioral science out there tells us that external motivators don't work. The challenge is that most companies haven't caught up with the times. Most companies think, most organizations behave in this way, that if they give a bonus, if they give some type of external reward, if they make a really cool office space with a foosball table and have, casual Fridays, that people are going to be more connected to their work and be more loyal employees. And unfortunately, that's not the case because, again, most of our jobs require cognitive input and us to solve problems. So how do you go about incentivizing people and motivating people if you can't do it externally? And this really comes down to the work of intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation really speaks to just that. You can't motivate anyone to do anything, right? And as parents, we know this. We can't motivate our kids to do something. Intrinsic in the workplace, it comes down to two things. In order for someone to be intrinsically motivated, the only way for us to be connected to our work, we've got to do it in two things. One, there has to be a personal connection to the work that we're doing. And secondarily, there has to be a personal connection to the people with whom we're doing the work. And our job then as managers is not, frankly, to motivate. You can't do that. But what you can do is create the environments by which this intrinsic motivation flourishes. And there are lots of ways to slice this pie, but for today's presentation, I'll break it down into 4 pieces. Intrinsic motivation rests on 4 pieces: mastery, relatedness, trust, and shared purpose. And I'm going to walk you through briefly what each of these 4 pieces mean and some ways that you, as organizational leaders and managers, can go about connecting with your staff so that they can become intrinsically motivated to come to work and inspired to come to work, which frankly for me is kind of my calling. We spend 60 hours a week at work, and if we're not connected and inspired to be there, then we're doing something wrong. So let's start with mastery. Mastery speaks to the notion that all of us have a profound desire to get better at something that we do, to progress in our field of work. And it's frankly the most tangible thing that you as a manager can work on. And one of the things that you can do to figure out if people have a sense of mastery, if they're progressing in their work and they feel that they're given the opportunity to rise to challenges and given new hats to try on, is to engage with Gallup. Gallup every year does lots of polls, but they've done one for the past 15 at least, if not more, called the Gallup 12, which some of you may be familiar with. And the Gallup 12 are probably the most concise 12 questions that you could ask your employees or your team members on whether or not they're engaged in your organization. And what you'll find is the first 8 of the 12 speak to the last 3 pieces that we're going to work on: purpose, trust, and relatedness. But so roughly 2/3 speak to those components, but a full third speak to this mastery piece. So one of the questions that's asked in Gallup that you could and certainly should ask your employees is, for example, in the last 6 months, has someone at work talked to you about your progress? In the last year, have you had opportunities to learn and grow? Is there someone at work who encourages your development? And at work, do you have the opportunity to do what you do best every day? These are really tangible pieces that speak to our own innate desire to want to grow and get better in the work that we do. And one of the recommendations that I would give you as an outside consultant is go download those Gallup 12s and engage your team members in these 12 questions, but specifically focusing in on their ability to work in this mastery piece. It's a fundamental part of the human psyche, and it's a relatively easy thing for managers to get their heads around because they're tangible answers that can be answered. The other pieces of intrinsic motivation, so just to remind us, we've got mastery, relatedness, trust, and shared purpose. That mastery is an easy one to get our head around. The relatedness, trust, and shared purpose really speak to softer skills. The good news with soft skills is that you can get better with them over time. Unlike IQ, your intellectual quotient, or your personality, which are relatively fixed entities, relatedness and trust and purpose, these things can grow over time, and they're a part of our emotional intelligence, which is not fixed. It absolutely is something that we can work on, but it's not as easily deliverable as this Gallup 12 survey. So let's start with relatedness. I'm sure you've all heard of Google. Google in 2012 set out to figure out what were the characteristics of their best performing teams. And so they hired an outside consultant. She was a Yale School of Management graduate. Her name was Julia Hrabowski. And she was hired to study the best teams at Google. Google wanted to then be able to hire the best people based on her research. And so for the course of 2 years, Julia studied 180 teams. And she studied every cross-function of team out there. High-performing teams, quotes, whatever that looks like, SVPs, frontline managers, all women teams, all men teams, millennial teams, baby boomer teams, and all iterations therein. And what she found is that the best teams out there didn't have one particular characteristics. They weren't the most organized teams. They weren't the teams that socialized the best together. They weren't the most efficient teams. What they were was the most psychologically safe teams. And if I had people's microphones on, I'd ask you what psychological safety means, but I'd love a couple of people to just jot down some ideas in the right-hand corner over here on what does it mean to create psychological safety at work? Any ideas on that? Looks like Mike and Amy are writing some answers on what psychological safety looks like. No risk, yeah, right? So certainly part of what psychological safety means is that people feel that they can actually be really comfortable being themselves within a group. Kalina says it's a safe place. Yep, that's totally right, is that people feel that they can be comfortable in their own skin and that they can, totally think outside of the box and come up with a new idea without being reprimanded by their peers or ostracized or made to feel little. Psychological safety really is at the core of what created some of these best teams. And what Julia found in her studies, was one of the underpinnings of psychological safety. You know what? And this isn't going to be quite as fun because I'm looking at my next slide if I had the full presentation, but you know what? I'm going to go off. You're not going to see me for 1 minute, and then I'll come back. And that way I can do this next part of the slide. All right. Everyone can still hear me, right? So here's what she found, is that the most psychologically safe teams were the ones that could read the best body language. So I'm going to quiz you all right now. Tell me what you think this woman is expressing. And I can't hear you or see you because my screen's full right now, but I'll walk through these and ask yourself, how many people here thinks that she's expressing interest? How many people here think that this person is expressing a joke? Is she affectionate? Or is she contented? I'll give you a second to think about that answer. But again, psychological safety means that people could pick up on body cues that other people had within their teams. And so the answer to this particular one is that this woman was expressing interest. I'll give you another test. How many people here think that this man with his eyes is expressing jokingness? Is he joking? Is he insisting? Is he amused? Or is he relaxed? And again, I have no way of knowing what people are saying because my screen's full right now. But joking, insisting, amused, or relaxed? All right, the answer is that he's insisting. That man's insisting with his eyes. And this study was done by Harvard in the 70s. They took article clippings from newspapers and magazines. But it turns out to be totally relevant today. And if people want to get better at reading body language, drop me a line and I'll show you how to practice this. You can do 2-minute tests online every day. All right, what's this woman saying? Is she panicked, incredulous, despondent, or interested? Panicked, incredulous, meaning doubtful or not believing. Despondent, meaning kind of sullen or crestfallen, or interested. What is she expressing? Despondent is what she is expressing there. Sullen, kind of crestfallen. This man right here, is he being pensive, irritated, excited, or hostile? Pensive, irritated, excited, or hostile? The answer is pensive. I think we've got 1 or 2 more. Puzzled, nervous, insisting, or contemplative? One more time here. Puzzled, nervous, insisting, or contemplative? The answer is nervous, and this is the last one. Is this woman expressing doubt? Is she affectionate? Is she playful, or is she aghast? The answer is that she's doubtful. All right, so I'm going to come back here. Oh, good. You guys were actually doing these things. That's great. I can see that you're actually writing them. Awesome. All right, so that worked. So that was one of the pieces that Julia found in her work, that the best performing teams were the ones that were the most psychologically safe. Another component beyond just reading body language, and hopefully this works again with my computer, is that they were really good at being empathetic with one another. And empathy is a skill that you absolutely can learn and get really, really good at. And there's a woman by the name of Brene Brown who people may have heard of. She has been on Oprah, and she has a lot of speaking on the topic of vulnerability and empathy for sure. And so she did a talk, and someone put it to a cute little video, which I'm going to share with you. And let's hope that this works as well.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, I'm down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
All right. Did that work for people? I hope it did. Empathy is one of the cornerstones of psychological safety. Gailey, I'd love to know if that worked. It's a cute video. I hope it did work for everyone. Empathy for me is, and you can dice this a lot of time, is the following. To become more empathetic, we really need to become better listeners, and we genuinely need to show curiosity in other people, and ultimately that leads to strong empathy. And there's a lot of work that can be done on both listening and genuine curiosity. But what I'd love to test you, and I'm going back to full screen again, is, and I won't be able to see your answers, but let's just test how much people were listening to this presentation. What year did Google start Project Aristotle? I can't see your answers, so I'll let people maybe write that down there. What year did Google start Project Aristotle? The answer was 2012. Let's see how well you were listening again. What was the consultant's name who was hired to do this project? Anyone remember her name? Her name was Julia Rozowski. And what was the name of the business school that Julia attended prior to coming to work for Google? Anyone remember that? Yale School of Management. How many teams were studied? 180. And I don't think I asked you this question. I answered it. What was the name of the study the department that carried out the study? It was the Google Analytics division. How long did she do the study for? That's not up there, but what's the answer to that? How long was the study carried out for? 2 years, exactly. So, listening for me really is as simple as just making a choice to listen. It really is as simple as shutting up and not coming up with ideas or retorts in one's mind. Listening really is an active choice. It's a decision that we make to pay attention, and it's one of the cornerstones of empathy. And from that, it's one of the cornerstones of an engaged workplace, at least on the relatedness piece. A lot of work that can be done in there, and that's part of the work that I do in my consultancy. How do you get people more empathetically engaged with another? All right, anyone know what this rock is? Any idea what this is? I'm looking over at my chat box over here. Anyone know what this rock is? It's lava, Leslie says. Meteorite, Mike says. Gloria says lava. So it turns out that it's platinum. And the reason that I put platinum up there is because we all know of the golden rule. The golden rule is that you ought to treat others the way that you want to be treated, right? The problem with the golden rule is that it unnecessarily places your priorities and what's important to you onto someone else. What if someone else doesn't want to be treated the way that you want to be treated? That, in a way, the golden rule is grossly selfish. So a better way to think about treating people, and again with this relatedness piece, is we ought to treat others the way that they want to be treated. That's the platinum rule. Treat others the way that they want to be treated. So how do you go about treating others the way that they want to be treated? Well, there's a thing out there called DISC, which I use a lot in my work, which is a behavioral-based tool which helps people identify not only how they would respond to a situation, but it helps you identify how other people will respond. And the way that it works is this. If you're not familiar with DISC, take the totality of all human behaviors, if you can imagine those, and place them inside a circle. And on the bottom part of the circle, you're going to get people who are more reflective and deliberate, and people on the top who are going to be more active and decisive. And this is a range of responses. People on the way bottom down there are going to be particularly slow and deliberate and thoughtful. People on the very top are going to be very reactionary. And this speaks to people's pace. If you divide the circle vertically in half, you have people who on the left whose priority are tasks and details, and who on the right priority is people and ideas. And again, there's a range in here. And if you put those two things together, what you end up getting is this thing called DISC, which speaks to different behavioral responses. These are not psychological, understanding why people behave the way they do. It's just that they respond the way that they do. So we all fall in here somewhere within the circle. If you happen to fall in the upper left-hand quadrant, some of your characteristics might be that you're direct and decisive and that you're a doer. But some of the areas for growth may be that at times you can come across as domineering or demanding. What would be cool is for people to self-identify where you think that you land in this without taking the test. But generally, tell me what you think. Where do you think you fall up in these circles, or in this circle? What quadrant do you fall in? I, for example, am up in the I quadrant. So I can come across as inspirational, interesting, interactive, but I can come across certainly as impulsive and irritating. The great thing about DISC is that not only does it identify what your behaviors are, it gives you a set of tools to interact with people who are different than you. And there are real challenges that can come into place, for example, with respect to both people's pace and their priority. Me as an I influential up there, my pace is going to be really fast, and my focus is going to be people. But people who are on the lower left-hand side of this quadrant, the compliants, who are much more cautious, careful, and conscientious, their pace is going to be slower than mine, and their priority is going to be tasks. So we come into real conflict diagonally across this board. Both our pace and our priorities are at odds with each other. People who maybe are steadies, they're going to get along with the compliant people with respect to their pace, but their priorities are going to be different. Steady people are people-focused, where compliant people are more task-focused. So there's going to be some challenges between those two. Gloria's saying, what was on the bottom of active and decisive? Oh, yeah, so this over here, this up and down speaks to your pace, left and right speaks to your priority, whether or not your priority is people or ideas or task or focus. So again, you put them all together, and you get this. This is a great tool. It's a great assessment that you can give people that you work with, because you can figure out where they land in this circle, and then you can come up with strategies on how to exchange with them in ways that are meaningful for them. So me, as an influential person that wants to get things done and quick, and I'm quick to the trigger, I need to really be thoughtful, and when I'm working with a compliant person, have a much different strategy than I would if I was working with another I or a D. And this next slide, what about shades of all of them with a strong I? What about shades of all of them? Yeah, we all can have pieces of this, but certainly we're going to be dominant in one area. So I have, for example, I with some D. These are meant to blend, but we certainly are going to have one area that's certainly more dominant than the other. The good news with this is that you can then use it as a tool to engage with people, and this is a very confusing slide, but it's not meant to be. There's a cheat sheet, and I'm happy to send this to you. If you have people in your office that are Ds, for example, Ds like to think very logically. So you, as someone who's not a D, or even if you are a D, you ought to display reasoning when you're engaging with them. Ds also like change. And so as someone that maybe has a subordinate or a team member on your team who's a D, you might want to give them tasks that they can vary their routine. That wouldn't be the case for someone who's a C, who likes steadiness and doesn't like the plan to be changed. So this is a little cheat sheet that once you take the test, and your team members can take the test, what I have them do oftentimes in seminars is interview each other and figure out what are the characteristics that are most important to them, and how they best might exchange with their team members. So again, happy to share all of that with you after this. It's a really great cheat sheet. All right, so that covers relatedness. I better go quick because we're running at 12:40. All right, trust. Trust is a real problem in today's marketplace. The general public doesn't believe in our institutions. This was done by Edelman, and what they found is that Canadians across 4 categories, the media, government, big business, NGOs, we don't believe in institutions. And our trust is falling in them. And specifically, with respect to business, it's not quite on the brink of distrust, but in general, we don't believe what people say, what organizations say, and we don't believe what the leaders of organizations say, is what Edelman has shown. And so there's a gentleman by the name, whose name is escaping, oh gosh, it's escaping me right now, but he works out of Harvard, and he runs an organization called the Trusted Advisor. And what he has done is try to figure out really what are the components that make up trust, and how do you engender trustworthiness in people. And his results are really fascinating. And so if you can, I don't know if you all can see this, but what I'd love for you to do is take a minute or two and just self-score yourself on these questions. People tell me those first 4. People tell me they're at ease with me. I don't focus on blaming. Score yourself on a scale of 1 to 5 on yourself on that. And then after you've done that, I want you to tell me, or just write them down on a note sheet, which question you think in order of importance, 1 to 4, 4 being the most important, is the question that is the most important when it comes to building trust. And Gertie, yes, you absolutely will. I'll send this to you afterwards. So do this real quick if you can. We're a little tight for time, but the insights in this will be interesting to see how people score themselves. And really what's more important is what questions do they think are the most important when it comes to building trust. So I'll give you guys about a minute to think about that, and then I'll tell you some some insights on how trust is actually built. Good, Rose. Gloria, order of importance: 2, 4, 1, and 3. Strong credentials being number 1. Consistent being number 3. 2 is people are telling you at ease. Okay, interesting, Gloria. Gally, that's great. Okay, number 1 being people telling you at ease. 3, 4, and 2. Interesting, interesting. Joy, 2, 1, 4, and 3. These are great. All right, so everyone can keep your scores handy there. And again, I'll share with you afterwards. But what each of these questions are asking, and this is a short questionnaire, normally it's like 30 questions, but the first question is speaking to reliability, whether or not someone is actually predictable and consistent in showing up. They do what they say they're going to do. The second one speaks to one's credibility, which speaks to whether or not people have the expertise or the mastery in a particular subject. 3 speaks to intimacy, how well people can emotionally connect with people. And the last one is self-orientation, and that speaks to whether or not the person that you're engaging with actually perceives that your interests are more invested in them than they are in yourself. Those are the 4 components of trust: reliability, credibility, intimacy, and self-orientation. And what was fascinating about this study from the trusted advisor is that credibility and reliability are actually the least important pieces of building trust. Turns out that intimacy and, by and large, self-orientation, how well others perceive that we're vested in their best outcomes rather than our own, is the fundamental parts of building trust. And what you'll see here, and I'm going to blow this up so you can see it. The trusted advisor is given different temperaments for each of these, but people who score themselves with high credibility and low self-orientation represent about 7% of the population. But when it comes to their trustworthiness, that characteristics get rated as last. The expert, which lots of people do, this third one down, high scores in credibility and reliability, roughly 38% of respondents say that those are the most important things in building trust: being credible and reliable. It turns out when asked of other people, that's tied for second to last. What turns out to be the most important traits for building trust is what's called the connector. The connector's characteristics are intimacy, really, really positively and powerfully connecting with other people, and demonstrating to them that they're invested in that person's best outcomes. Only 9% of the population scored those as being the most important scores, and it turns out to be the most fundamental factors in creating trust in an environment or with anyone. So what can you do to build some of this intimacy and self-orientation? And there are thousands of things. Literally, I picked up 6 or so for this. I'm looking over these things. Good thing we're not going to be judged. No judging here, Gloria. All right, so how do you improve your intimacy and self-orientation? Well, one thing that you can do is tell your team members something you appreciate about them every single day. More importantly, what you can do is tell them how what their job did impacted the overall mission of the organization, how what they do is imperative to the greater whole. Another thing you can do is celebrate small successes together with your teams. Rather than coming together once a quarter or once a year to talk about KPIs, do your KPIs on a weekly basis on small positive things. Another thing you can do to prove your intimacy and self-orientation is get real personal with people. Not awkwardly personal, but become empathetic. Practice the relatedness piece. These trust and relatedness go hand in hand. We're taught at work that we need to be very stoic in our exchanges with people and not get personal, and that's just not true. What we're called to do is connect with people at work. And so when someone asks you next, how was your weekend? Tell them, listen, I had a really great weekend because my mother-in-law took care of the kids, and I got to go out with my husband, and we had a really great date, and we went and saw Batman, and it was really cool. Have you seen Batman? Whatever, some example, but the goal is to connect with people. The last thing is that, people can flush out BS from a mile away. And, if there's BS going on in situations, call it out in the room. That's a real quick way to orient yourself towards someone else and show them that you're vested in their greater good. Lots of examples. And if you want resources, I'll share them with you. This last piece, and I'm going quick because we've had some technical difficulties. So we talked about mastery, we talked about relatedness, we talked about trust. The last one is purpose. Purpose is fundamental in creating engaged, motivated, intrinsically motivated workplaces. I'm going to go full screen real quick on this. This is me 7 or 8 years ago. I was living in Mexico City. I got laid off, or downsized, I guess, because of the recession. I moved back to the United States. I got dumped. I got depressed. So I thought the only reasonable thing for me to do was to buy a bicycle and to ride it across the United States. And so I did. I rode it across the United States. I bought a bike. I hadn't ridden a bike in like 15 years. I trained for 2 weeks, and then I rode my bike into the great unknown across the United States. And I rode, and I was skinnier, and I rode, and I pushed a lot up hills, and I camped. And I had a lot of time to think about life and what was important to me. And this is a picture of the prairies, which are not flat. The Midwest in the United States, they're not flat at all. They're terribly hilly with terrible winds, and it's miserable. And all I wanted to do was quit, but I didn't. I ended up getting to Chicago, and then it started to get cold again. I didn't prepare for this trip at all. It was like the middle of August when I left, so I wanted to get back to the East Coast before winter had started to change. So I was getting cold, and anyway, I got to New York, and the road ran out, and I took a ferry, and I eventually made it back to Harvard, where I had done my master's work in theology and in administration. And when I got there, I wrote a book about my trip, and the trip was not so much about the voyage, though part of it was. Really, it was about finding purpose, because what I had done over the course of those 90 days was interviewed hundreds of people, everyday people, line cooks, garage mechanics, homeless people, whoever I would talk to me about how they found meaning and purpose in their life. And what I found was that to create a sense of personal purpose, which is so important at work and in life, there are some ingredients. The first is we need to have our basic needs met, which I think everyone on this call does. We don't, and in Canada in general, we're not wondering where our next meal is going to come from, or if we're going to have shelter tonight. So in that sense, we're quite lucky. We can actually think about purpose in a way that that's a bit of a luxury and a bit of a responsibility, because we don't have to think about our basic needs. The next then part of personal purpose is this notion of mastery. And again, we talked about this at the beginning, certainly at work, but in life. To have purpose in life, we need to really cultivate those elements and ingredients about our personhood that makes us us. That's the mastery piece, getting really, really good at whatever core elements make you you. And then you've got to share those with the world. The service piece isn't volunteering for volunteering's sake. It's giving away who you are with the world. Those are some ingredients for purpose. These last three then speak to vulnerability, the notion that the more that we let ourselves be affected by the world, the more joy we end up having, the more meaning we end up having. People who are purposeful live grateful lives. And the last thing is people who feel that they have purpose and their lives belong to something. And this is a fundamental, just wonderful thing that companies could do for their employees. People want to feel like they're participating in something larger than just themselves. And to the extent that companies could capitalize on this human desire to belong to something, that's one of the fundamental underpinnings of purpose. The trick then with this purpose is to then connect it to the corporate. And most companies don't talk about, I'll go back here. This is Simon Sinek. Most people don't talk about why they do what they do. They talk about what they do. They talk about what they do or how they do it. The why really is the motivating factor. Why are we here? And most organizations don't speak about that. most organizations talk about their mission and their values and their purpose, or pardon me, their vision. So their vision really is a who statement, what you'd like to become. It's aspirational. A mission statement is how you're going to accomplish those goals. Your values statements really are, the behaviors by which you'll accomplish those. But the why statement fundamentally is important for an organization. Why are we here? What are we doing? Why does it matter? What problem are we solving? And there's not a lot of organizations out there that do this well. Southwest is one. They have a very, very clear defined vision. They want to become the world's most loved, flown, and profitable airline. Their mission is to dedicate themselves to the highest quality of customer service. They've got a whole list of values that people who work there know, but their purpose, which most every employee can talk about, is to connect people to what's important to them through travel. That's pretty compelling. If I were a janitor, if I were a pilot, if I were a flight attendant, if I were a grounds crew, and I knew that everything that I was doing was aimed at helping connecting people to what's important to them, that's a pretty powerful purpose. And if you can overlap then that personal purpose with that professional one, you've got the ingredients for really, really strong intrinsic motivation. Another way of thinking about organizational or project purpose statement is thinking about what do you do and then figuring out what effect does it have. So maybe what you do is you build heavy machinery for large-scale civil works project, but the effect that has is that it allows communities to grow and prosper. Here's one that a CEO in town told me that what they literally do is serve fresh coffees and pastries in unique venues, but the effect that they're trying to have with that is to honor the intrinsic value in every single person that purchases from them. And that's literally what they aim to do with every exchange, is to honor their clients' humanity. And they do that by serving them food. Another one, I made these up, right, is big data IT solutions. Maybe what you're doing is organizing information to help solve the world's most pressing problems. All of this to say that the more clear you can become on your organizational purpose, why you exist, and overlap that with one's personal purpose, why we are individually called to be in the world, and then you mix those all things together. We've got the shared purpose, and you build trust, and you learn how to be more emotionally attuned with others, that relatedness through DISC, body language and emotional intelligence and empathy. And then you give people the opportunity to have challenges and grow in their careers and their job professions. Those are pretty much the ingredients for intrinsic motivation. And if you do just a couple of those things, you'll be miles ahead with respect to team engagement than maybe where you are right now. And you'll be like this woman, Wilda, my tour guide, who she didn't know any of these things, but she really did a great job at the trust component. We trusted her explicitly because she was vulnerable to us. Her relatedness and her ability to relate with us on an emotional level was impeccable. And so I'd invite you all to be Wildas and reach your own Machu Picchus and create really great, amazing places for people to work at. That's what I got for you. Any questions? Can we turn on speakers? I don't know how this works. People are typing, but Jenny, are we allowed to turn on microphones for this part? Well.
Hi, you definitely can turn on your microphone now.
Oh, the pyramid sign. Yeah, here is my email. If people need anything from me, 6.5consulting.com. You can do that. And then can people still hear me? There's that I have no idea if I'm even on. Oh, great. Okay. Yeah. Okay, there you go. There, and someone asked to see that triangle slide. There that is. Thank you all for having me. I appreciate it very much. I'll wait around here for any questions if anyone has one.
Hi Jenny, could you please enlarge the chat features in the middle of the screen so that people can see all the questions, and also Casey can see the question as well?
Like that? Is that it?
Excellent. Could you please enlarge it? Alright everyone, thank you so much for attending today's webinar. I would like to personally thank Casey a lot for hosting this webinar and giving us a really interesting presentation. His insight has a lot to accomplish and comment on top of our work. And just so you know, we will upload this slide on your member portal. And if you would like to connect with Casey, his email address is right there in the chat. You also can find information about Casey on your member portal as well right after today's webinar. We do have a little bit of sound system due to multiple presenter turn on the microphone at the same time. So huge shout out for you, Casey, for handling the situation very well. We are very happy to have you today, and thank you so much for doing this. After this webinar, if you would like to get in touch with Casey, please ensure to send him an email, or you can connect with him directly through the member portal. Thank you so much, everyone, for a very great webinar. We will now end the meeting. Thank you.